Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.
Good evening, everybody. This is Great Pharaoh with you on Rediscovery Channel. I am here with Ivor Kovac, and we are here to basically, if you're new to our station, basically what we do is we cover history. We cover historical events. We cover people in history. We cover all significant people in history, and we try to tie them into, current events. We try to tie them into our faith. We really try to equip our audience with tremendous knowledge and, something that'll stick, 10, 20 years from now, you can just, basically learn all these wonderful historical facts that really do apply to our lives today and will have great value in our lives tomorrow. So today we are going to cover King Constantine, well, actually Emperor Constantine the Great. Ivor Kovac is here with us, and he will be, chiming in and asking any questions he may have, and sort of to keep us captivated. We'll have some, or keep us engaged. We'll have some, conversation between and some discussion. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Constantine the Great, I'm sure many people have heard of him, but not a lot of people really know what he did. Maybe some people think like he's, like Alexandria the Great or some conqueror or some, most people know he was like a Roman ruler, a Roman Empire. Basically, Constantine the Great is not only a Roman emperor, but he essentially was the first Roman emperor to accept the Christian faith. He basically turned the whole Roman Empire from what used to be like a pagan ruled pagan worshiping empire to a Christian empire. And Rome at the time was going through a lot of trials, a lot of political instability, and the empire was being threatened as far back as Diocletian, who was responsible for the great Christian persecution. So we're going to tie in some people you've heard, you may not have heard of, and we're going to get you up to speed on Constantine the Great. So if anybody says, brings up Constantine the Great in a conversation or whatnot, you're going to be able to have a very interesting conversation. So Emperor Constantine the Great, he was born around 272 AD, and he died 337 AD. So, essentially he's in his 60s. He lived to his late 60s. So we're talking late 3rd century to early 4th century. Okay. He was born in a city called Nasu Dacia Mediterranea, which is now called Nis, Serbia. And I'm sort of going to take a little, I'm sort of going to, have a little topic here on the side because, we want to definitely have a closeness with our audience and share some things about us and help our audience and try to, keep that, learn about all sorts of different stuff. So Serbia was actually one of the countries I visited personally during my travels in the Balkans Peninsula. So like I said, sort of a side note to our audience, if you ever want to think of going on a vacation or trip, Europe, Eastern Europe, I highly recommend you make the trip. The trip was basically set up for the Balkans Peninsula. So it's essentially Eastern Europe. There's 4 countries. You have Macedonia, Serbia, Montenegro, and Croatia. And the trip is highly affordable. It has an amazing exchange rate. The people there are awesome. The 4 countries are all along the water, beautiful water. They're actually pretty much all Orthodox countries, predominantly. And it's really beautiful just to have sort of, it is sort of like a mini Christian empire, if you will, if you put the four countries together. Interestingly enough, but what I could tell you, the fourth country, Croatia, is predominantly Catholic, and when I went there, it just felt like you're dealing with a lot of it felt like I was dealing with Americans, like you and me, um, but in today's America, our Christian identity as a country, most people would argue is being challenged, and with all sorts of stuff going on. So
Yeah.
over there, they are predominantly Orthodox Christian countries. They really are sort of isolated from the mess that's going on these days and stuff. So
I got a question, Great Pharaoh.
absolutely.
You excluded Greece from that. Is that because Greece wasn't on your travel itinerary?
It was not. I do believe it is part of the Balkans
Yeah,
Peninsula.
it is.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
it wasn't included, and I think the idea was it was a church set up kind of travel package because me being Orthodox, we wanted to go to Orthodox countries, so just explore different Orthodox countries. Not necessarily every time. I mean, there were trips for Turkey, there were trips for Greece in the past, trips for Italy certainly, but I think this one was sort of to explore Orthodox countries and enjoy the sights and the scenes because it definitely is. It's very beautiful. And of course, yes, in Greece it's predominantly Orthodox as well. So
Tasty
thanks for
food
bringing that
also.
up, Ivor Kovac. I'm sorry.
Just saying it's tasty food also.
Oh yeah,
They have
absolutely.
some tasty food.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, and then the other thing is, what's also sort of a miracle too is, these small countries are much closer to, Germany, Russia, China, the Middle East, and we, I don't know how much we've covered in our previous videos, but we never forget our history, right? So these are communist type countries and stuff, and yet you have these small countries just in the middle of all that, and they're not even scathed the least bit, in the midst of these historically brutal civilizations in the past. So now it's what's going on in Russia, China, Germany's always like, you never know what's going on there. But anyway, we don't have to be politically correct on here. We just have to share history, and and if you agree with what we say, that's fine. If you have a disagreement, feel free to put a little comment on there, give us a thumbs up, if and just let us know what you thought about the video. We like a lot of positivity around here. So another thing I like to add is I remember going to a monastery in Macedonia. So there's four countries: Macedonia, Serbia, Montenegro, and Croatia. So when we went to Macedonia, I went to a monastery there, and they have plenty of monasteries, churches, convents all over. So I remember distinctly as we were taking a tour in the monastery in Macedonia, I sort of was overhearing these beautiful hierarchical chants just kind of flowing from a farther distance, following some bells to the Vesper service, I suppose. So you can only imagine how beautiful it sounded. I couldn't stop following where the chants were coming from. And I left the tour group for a few minutes, and I went to the bookstore. And with the very English that maybe they could understand and a few hand signals, I told them, I'm hearing this beautiful chant. And I'm like pointing in my ears. I'm like, this is so beautiful, and I'm like, do you have CD? And I'm like trying to do like the shape of a CD. Like, do you have audio, And the guy was like, okay. And he was like, he just knew exactly what audio CD I was looking for. So it was like a 2 CD set basically of their Vespers.
What language were they using?
They were using Macedonian.
That's
Macedonian
yeah, I
language.
think
Yeah.
that's a that's
It is Slavic.
Slavic language, yeah.
Yeah. And it's I still listen to those chants till this day, Ivor Kovac. Believe it or not, I still have those 2 CDs. I play in my car all the time. Macedonian chant, if you've never heard of it, just type it into Google or something. Start getting into it. It's quite magnificent. I mean, it's very impressive. It's very beautiful, and it's just super powerful. So I recommend anybody going to Macedonia, visit their monasteries, listen to their chants, meet their people. They're unbelievable. It's an unbelievable culture. They're very friendly. So And then the other three countries were Serbia, Montenegro, and Croatia. So they're four predominantly Christian countries. The first three are predominantly Eastern Orthodox. Croatia is primarily Roman Catholic. So anyway, okay, back to Constantine the Great. All right, so yeah, so all right, so basically, you can't start talking about Constantine the Great until you got to mention his father from the very beginning, because his father was among what we call the four tetrarchy ruler system that was set up by Diocletian. Okay, so if none of y'all have heard of Diocletian, he was basically this brutal Roman ruler who just decided he wanted to massacre every Christian on the face of the earth. He's basically persecuting his own citizens, just slaughtering them, to death. And it was so brutal that they would say that the blood would reach the knees of the horses. That's just how bloody that time period was. So Constantine, his father, Constantinus, was among the four tetrarchy ruler system that Diocletian set up. Basically, Diocletian said, look, we have military issues and we have civil issues in our country. So the Augustuses, which will be myself and, another Augustus, will sort of be, superior to the co-emperors, two other rulers, which will be the Caesars, and they'll be responsible for more of the, I'm not sure who fulfilled the military side and the civic. I'm assuming that the Augustuses fulfilled the civic duties more, and the Caesars were more about the military.
So,
or maybe it was
one
the
of
other way
those
around. I
is
think it
like
was the other way around.
one of them is like the senior position, and the other is the junior. I believe Augustus
Yes.
is the senior position, and
Yes.
Caesar is like the guy that's going to succeed the Augustus. He's going to follow him.
Traditionally, that's how it goes. It wasn't like that during Constantine the Great's period. It was like that in some cases and in some periods. But the idea was that you basically have like an Augustus for the East and West, you have a Caesar for the East and West, and each of them are taking care of the civil and military concerns of the country. So you have four tetrarch rulers at the same time. So the first was Constantine the Great's father, Constantinus the First, and Galerius. They were the first two like Augustuses of this official ruling system. So when Diocletian retired, he went off to like this like getaway, like whatever place or whatever resort, whatever, I don't know, retirement place. He basically set Constantinus the First and Galerius as the Augustuses of the West and East, with Severus II and Maximinus II as the Caesars. So Severus II and Galerius were the Augustuses of the East and West. And so then the next period after that, Severus and Galerius were the next Augustuses. So yeah, Severus was a Caesar. He eventually became Augustus, like you said. But in this case, Galerius became the Augustus instead of Maximinus II, because Diocletian just felt that he was trouble as well. And also Constantine. He also had an issue with Constantine as well, because Constantine was persecuting Christians at the time, but he was starting to like question it and basically felt like, what was the point of this? Like, why are we killing all these people for no reason? They're good people and stuff. And so Diocletian, just thought this was going to be like a threat to his like dynasty or whatever. So at this point, you have Severus II and Galerius, who become the Augustuses, and then you have Maximinus and Constantine as the Caesars. Okay, like so immediately. Look, Constantine and his dad, like they're in the fold. I mean, they are, they're rulers. They're rulers here in the Roman Empire. They're a big deal. They're involved with everything. And so the reason why I'm making that point is, you're seeing a very, powerful ruler, moving his society more into a faith-based kind of identity. So that's very rare that you see. A lot of the military rulers, a lot of the powerful rulers that you see today, it's not about religion, right? It's, that we call them, totalitarian states or dictatorships. And there's a lot of atheism, and there's just a lot of, just nothing to do with faith or anything like that. So
it depends on, like today, that's the case. Like our governments, most of the governments today, they mostly promote atheism.
Yeah.
But in the past, there was usually
Hmm.
The state and the religion were usually pretty close, and sometimes, the state would run the religion or vice versa. Like the Aztecs, they used to sacrifice people to the sun god Huitzilopochtli. So there was a established religion. I guess today we could say that atheism is a state religion. I mean, they don't like it when you call them religious or anything like that, but it does meet some of the hallmarks and requirements of being a faith-based belief system. So,
Sure,
yeah.
sure. And thanks for reminding me. They actually were. It was like a paganistic type of society. The Roman Empire was,
Hmm.
right? They actually did believe in like multiple gods and stuff, like Zeus, Hercules, Jupiter, like stuff like in astrology, like the Greeks and stuff like that. So they believe like in multiple gods, things of that nature. Um, so then the next period you have Maxentius and Maximian as usurpers in Italy and Africa. So I looked up that word usurpers, and actually just it simply means there were rulers who were basically trying to get control by force, basically illegally. They're trying to gain power, when their instability in the Roman Empire has basically become the political climate, right? So
Hmm.
like what you had was what we call the third century crisis, and don't get that confused with Diocletian's persecution period, because it's actually the complete opposite. The third century crisis, which was before the Diocletian persecution, basically was two Roman empires basically about to collapse. You have two empires essentially that are coming to fruition. It's civil war. They're basically about to split the country in half. But one of like the generals, who's just loyal to all of Rome, I think his name was Aurelian, and he won a lot of like wars and stuff, and was able to. He played a huge role in uniting the Roman Empire as well as Diocletian. So Diocletian also, officially reunified the Roman Empire essentially after the crisis of the third century. So um, we all know now today that Diocletian was no hero. I mean, he was just a very brutal man. And I'll get into that later. But so that's what that means. Usurpers is the term that we use. So Maxentius and Maximian, they're still, even after he reunited the Roman Empire, you're still going to have those there's sort of like those reaction forces, right, in a society where that's still like he's got it all together, but there's still kind of conflict within, and still sort of corruption and rivals. So um the conflict, and the battles, that Constantine took part in for the Roman Empire would then begin. So, like I said, we're still in the middle of civil war. It's just not as big as a magnitude. You sort of have smaller parts playing, and at this point, you have Galerius as the Augustus with Maximian the second. Okay, so Galerius is still the Augustus, but it was Severus the second, but now Maximian the second has taken his place. Um, well, no, pardon me. Galerius is the Augustus. Maximian the second is Caesar, and at this point, Constantine is claiming to be the Augustus of all of Rome. Like the sole Augustus leader, right? Like at this point, Constantine's like, I'm not dividing power with the Augustuses. I'm not a Caesar. His aim is to um, basically create a fully united Roman Empire where the government is organized between its military, its civilians, and we'll see later, in detail the things that he did to do that. So he at this point he's claiming to be the Augustus. So this is sort of where civil wars sort of coming about, and sort of power struggle. So the other tetrarchs leading up to the Constantinian dynasty, and when I say the Constantinian dynasty, it's like basically began when he united all of the Roman Empire once again. Like so, Diocletian sort of to a large capacity united the Roman Empire, but Constantine sort of he changed the whole identity of the empire, and then united it. So the Constantine dynasty begins, and and you basically have this Roman Christian Empire, which we know today was the Byzantine Empire, with the city of Byzantium as sort of the Christian capital, which later he named Constantinople after himself. Okay, so that's where the rest of the Constantine dynasty emperors would reside, basically, and rule for the next 1,000 years. Okay, and then, after that was the Great Fall of Constantinople. I don't know if y'all have heard of that, but basically the Ottoman Empire takes over. There's like the Latin Empire sort of involved, but mainly the Ottoman Empire, which is basically today we know as the Turks. And, so that portion of the Roman Empire became Turkey, and Byzantine, which was called Byzantium, which was later became called Constantinople, this Christian capital, is now today's capital of Turkey, called Istanbul. So after Constantine proclaims himself as the Augustus, right? Like prior to all that, so we're backing up now. We're in the middle of civil war, okay? Licinius and Galerius would hold power as the Augustus of the East and West, where civil war would begin with Maximinus II and Constantine the Great as the two Caesars. So Maxentius would be the usurper in Rome. He was causing trouble in Rome. He was obviously, there was some clashing going on with Constantine and a power struggle there for who essentially would be the Caesar. So now the details, I know y'all are already saying like, okay, where's Licentius coming from? Where's Maxentius coming from? Okay. The details as to what went on during each of these ships and tetrarchs and knowing the names, it's not as important as much as to know that essentially after Diocletian would pass away, after the persecution, the Diocletian persecution, and Rome still being this big, massive empire, it would eventually face a war between good and evil. I mean, that if you really want to back up and see what's really going on, okay, you have the Christian faith, right? So we have, Christ, okay, Christ, persecuted, crucified, 33 AD. Then you have the apostles, right? And they're spreading the faith. And you got Paul and Peter, and they're going to Rome, and Paul's going to Greece, Peter's going to Rome, and they're spreading Christianity, 72 apostles, right? So once Christianity begins to spread like wildfire, right? Rome, the Roman Empire, okay, like they're not having it. They were the very empire that basically they were the ones who crucified Christ. They weren't having it. So they had begun persecuting the Christians and stuff. So you have this big, massive empire, and you have these like peaceful, loving Christians trying to spread the faith. So this is one of the things that as Christians we can take pride in, is that time and time and again, it's when you least expect that the Christian faith continues to grow. It's constantly full of great miracles and revelations, and this is how Constantine was able to make the Roman Empire, a Christian empire, which you'll see later. He saw certain revelations and a lot of miraculous things that happened. So you have this brutal rule of Diocletian, simply called the Diocletian persecution, which would be the empire's last, largest, and bloodiest official persecution of Christianity. Okay, you can begin to compare Constantine, the life of Constantine the Great, as Saint Paul, for instance, because both of them were essentially Roman, like soldiers, officers. Like Paul was like a Sadducee, Constantine was a Caesar. Okay,
wait, I'm sorry, Great Pharaoh. Paul was a Pharisee.
Oh, Pharisee. I thought he was. Yeah, but then isn't there like there's like a sect within the Pharisees called the Sadducees?
No, the Sadducees were a different sect.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I got that mixed up.
They're both Jews. Paul was a Pharisee. The Pharisees were the ones that believed in like an afterlife and a resurrection, and they're the ones that also supposedly had the oral Torah, whereas the Sadducees thought there was no afterlife. And they didn't think there was any resurrection. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So I wanted to make this point because you're going to see later why the Orthodox churches consider him like a huge saint, almost like an apostolic saint. So, their lives are very similar in the beginning. They, one's persecuting Christians for the sake of, Israel, right? God's people, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, just like Ivor Kovac was saying. Okay, he's defending their own personal view of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're persecuting Christians. Okay, they're they still think that they're waiting on the Messiah, so to speak, and they're still, they've been let out of Egypt by Moses, but still, like, they're the Messiah, they're still waiting on the Messiah, and they're still going through this journey. So he's meaning well. And then you have Constantine the Great, who, he cares about country, his civic duties, God, duty, country. Except, he's a pagan worshiper. Like, they believe in kind of like multiple gods, right? Like the god of, like, pardon?
Polytheism.
Polytheism, exactly. Yeah, polytheism. Like, you have like a god of, like, the god of sex, like the god of whatever. Okay, like, there's just a god for everything, and it's just kind of weird and twisted, because it's just like you offer these sacrifices and this and that, but then, like, why are they persecuting these innocent people? So that's the thing. So even though he was a pagan worshiper most of his life, he saw that the Christians weren't doing anything wrong. Like, he really was a very reasonable, always a very logical thinking person. He was never, like, crazy or insane. He always had everything in perspective. So he just thought that this was, like, really weird. Like, why am I doing this? So, at this point, you have Licinius and Constantine the Great. They would eventually assume, like, the power as the Augustuses of the West and the East, with Licinius the Second and Constantine the Second and Crispus as Caesars. So in this case, you have, like, 3 Caesars going on. So I think there's some civil war as well at this point. But I'm not sure. I think at the time it wasn't officially 4 tetrarch system. At this point, like, they needed 3. I'm not sure. But the point I'm trying to make here is you have this battle of good and evil going on. So Christianity is spreading and everything like wildfire, but now you have this great, powerful empire, the Roman Empire, where they're just not having it. So where does it begin? How does such a huge empire basically go from persecuting the Christians to becoming an actual Christian empire, that the very identity of the empire itself? So you would later there would be a lot of civil wars going on, and Constantine working his way to power for Rome. And basically, at the end of the day, he's getting rid of the bad guys. He's getting rid of intruders, barbarians. They still have their police force, so to speak, which we say, like, the mobility of the mobile units, for internal problems within the country. Then you have the garrisons, like the National Guard or, like, Border Patrol, keeping intruders out. So he did a lot of that stuff. Okay, like, he had it's very similar, like, his life to David as well, like King David as well. Like, there is a story that he did kill a lion. Like, they tested him out to see if, like, he could kill a lion. He killed a lion or something to see if, like, he was fit for the job to be, like, the next Augustus or whatnot. So
Constantine killed a lion?
Yeah.
When?
He killed a lion.
Okay. Like at
Yeah,
the
in the
Colosseum kind of thing?
Yeah, I believe so. It was a Colosseum, or I think it was either the Colosseum or, like, they say Diocletian's court is where he got educated. So Diocletian was trying to bring him up as a ruler, but I don't know if, like, it was the official Colosseum or there was, like, another sort of arena thing. But that's from what I saw in some illustration or whatnot. Like, they're basically putting Christians, and most likely it was a Colosseum. I'm not sure, or it was Diocletian's court. But at this point in the Colosseum, for sport, they would have Christians go in the Colosseum and people would watch them being eaten alive by lions. Okay, like, that was their form of entertainment back then. That's how, like, brutal and sadistic the Romans were. Okay, like, that's just how they were. And they put him to the test. They were like, okay, let's see if you can survive this. And he killed a lion. I don't know if he killed a bear. No, he didn't kill a bear. That was just King David. But it's the same idea, right? And he fought off a lot of like intruders, you know, and he was just very strong, powerful ruler, and he knew how to mobilize his military and defend Rome. Okay, so you have now Licinius and Constantine the Great. They assume all this power after all these civil wars are going on for the East and the West. So like Licinius is in the West, Constantine the Great he's in the East, and then you have Licinius the Second, his son, and Constantine the Second, Constantine's son, as the Caesars, and Crispus as well. So within that, you know, within that power struggle, after assuming all this power, there's still conflict going on. There is still this sort of resistance. So you have like Valerius Valens, you know, he's the Augustus of the West, and Martinian is the Augustus of the East. I'm sorry, that's the period after that. I'm sorry. So after that period where you have those two Augustuses and then those three Caesars, later you would have, I believe, rivals Valerius Valens as the Augustus of the West and Martinian as the Augustus of the East. So they're claiming to be the Augustuses, you know, while Licinius and Constantine are saying no, like we're the Augustuses. So that's essentially what's happening. So you have civil war. The Constantinian dynasty pretty much begins at that point when you know Constantine like gets rid of all his political rivals, you know, and he assumes, you know, great power over the entire Roman Empire in 324 AD, and he titles himself as essentially the Roman emperor, and the empire is basically the Roman Christian Empire. It is the official religion of the state, and basically this empire would go on to rule for 1,000 years. He would build Byzantium, the city of Byzantium, which he would later call Constantinople, and that was the capital, like the Christian capital of the Roman Empire. And yeah, and his basically his seed, his dynasty would rule basically, which we now know as the Byzantine Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, for the next 1,000 years. And then you have the great fall of Constantinople. So the Ottoman Empire came, they were able to capture Constantinople, and therefore basically grab just a huge part of the Roman Empire and take over. And now today you have Turkey. Okay, so that's basically, there were the Turks, you have Turkey. Constantinople is now the capital of Turkey, which is today is called Istanbul. Okay, so now by the time Constantine has assumed full power and control over the new Christian empire, you know, so we back up again, he would enact, you know, many different reforms. Okay, he restructured the government. He separated civil and military authorities, and he found ways to, so that there wouldn't be corruption, right? You don't want to have like a dictatorship or totalitarian state or whatnot. You know, you want to have people for politics, people for the war, separating all that. And even though that's sort of how the tetrarch system was meant to be set up, it was not. There was just so much corruption that, you know, at the end of the day, it could not sustain itself. So at the end of the day, he's doing a lot of the same things, but he's restructured it differently to where now you don't have like, you know, as much corruption and you know, and backsliding and you know, and persecution too. That was another thing. Like, so he would introduce the I believe the Edict of Milan, and basically the Edict of Milan was basically the first set of laws that would be used to defend Christians. And basically, you know, I'll get into that a little bit later. But you know, at this point, he introduces the solidus currency to fight inflation. So basically, it was like a gold coin that would essentially become the official currency during the Byzantine Empire and Europe for like the next 1,000 years. He made the military more dynamic by establishing the mobile units to fight off threats from within. So, like I said, it's like law enforcement. He had law enforcement, and then he had garrison troops, which is essentially today is like your National Guard or like your national border patrol or border security. Okay, so he would eventually solidify the border through campaigns and politics, and he would still fight off still some intruders and stuff. Because that's just how it is. Like it's just a continuous process of preserving the empire. And then he would resettle Roman culture in abandoned areas around the border that his predecessors would abandon during the crisis of the third century. So, there was just a lot of areas that were abandoned, in Rome for such a long time, and he wanted to make sure that at those areas around the border, like he was confirming this is Rome, and so, he put in some he resettled it with Roman culture, okay. And for those of you who don't know what the crisis of the third century was, like I said, it wasn't the persecution period of Diocletian. Okay, it was the reunification due to the civil war breaking out by the Roman, that was breaking out between two different empires. There were it was a huge civil war going on, and Aurelian was a Roman general, and Diocletian came to power. So Aurelian was he was loyal to the Roman Empire. Diocletian as well, and they sort of worked together with the military, with their forces, with politicians, and they were able to keep Rome from collapsing. Okay, so he was essentially the ruler. Diocletian was essentially the ruler that reunified Rome back into a single empire, when essentially it was going to be two separate empires. But like I said, Diocletian was no hero. At the end of the day, he was responsible for the massacre and torture of many Christians, and many Christians who we consider as saints and martyrs, recognized by the Orthodox churches as well as the Catholic churches. So anyway, Constantine the Great, he begins to favor Christianity over time. So within the last 12 years of his life, he would receive revelations or dreams from Christ or an angel, signifying the reunification of God's kingdom, and no longer the pagan worship of idols and statues and different gods of, Zeus, Jupiter, Hercules, all these different gods of whatever, right? So, and then around the end of his life, so I'm giving y'all sort of a perspective, sort of giving y'all a big picture, and we'll get into some more detail. So around the end of his life, he would eventually be baptized by what most people say was an Arian bishop, Bishop Eusebius, or Pope Sylvester I. And the reason why that's significant is because the Catholic Church doesn't consider him a saint, because Eusebius, being an Arian bishop, was considered a heretical sect. The Arians, which they called the Arians, basically followers of Arius. So they thought it was it was a gray spot, and they could not acknowledge or revere him as a saint because they believed that it was heretical to be baptized by a heretical bishop. So they considered him a heretic or whatnot, or maybe they're not drawing any form of conclusion, but they certainly do not revere him as a saint by any stretch of the imagination. Now, does that mean that no Catholics consider him to be a saint? No, there are many Catholics who do consider him to be a saint. Okay, and I'll get into the reason why and why it's so obvious. So the Edict of Milan, I said I would get now into detail about that. So it was the first set of laws that would give tolerance and freedom to all the Christians. Okay, they would not be persecuted. They would be reimbursed of their expenses or belongings that were taken from them or destroyed during the Diocletian persecution, right? Like just everything, whatever was taken from them, burying their family members, just all of the horrible things that was done to them, to their basically to their all of their well-being and everything. So he took care of the Christians, he protected them, and he basically told the rest of the empire, like, that nobody, we're tolerating everybody, and this is a free society, and this and that. So that was sort of the transition before he made it an official Christian religion. So we're going to get into why it became officially Christian and how his faith evolved throughout the years in the last 12 years of his life. So he was also known for during this time, as his faith is evolving, he's overseeing the first of the 3 ecumenical councils. So most Orthodox believers, Catholics, or just all Christians in general understand that there were ecumenical councils. Like there was one in Nicaea, there was one in Ephesus, and there was one in Constantinople. And then Chalcedon is usually kind of mentioned separately because that was going over certain other issues that weren't tied in supposedly to the idea of the Trinity. They were just separate issues that were being addressed, such as the Immaculate Conception, or like the Mary is sinless and the Pope being infallible on his seat and things like that. So anyway, he oversaw the first council. So when Arius, the heretic, basically came out and said, look, the Trinity, you guys got it all mixed up. The Father is superior to the Son and the Holy Spirit. Like the Father, he's the Almighty God. The Son is essentially he's created by the Father. So like how can they be worshipped equally? And the Holy Spirit is also sort of created. Basically he was basically saying that Christ was not God, which is the main foundational belief in Christianity, right? By saying you're superior to the Father, you're at this point he's not God anymore, right? Because we still believe that God is still one. So it contradicts itself. So this heresy was spreading. You're threatening basically the growth of Christianity as we know it. Like if those councils hadn't taken place. So he basically set it all up, and in what is today Iznik, Turkey. All of them were taking place in Turkey, all these councils. The second would take place in Ephesus, which was the capital of the Roman province in Asia, which is now Selkuk in Izmir district of Turkey. And the third was in Chalcedon, which is in a small city in which is today Istanbul, Turkey, another small city. And Constantinople also was like in a small city of Istanbul, Turkey as well. So, or districts, right? So, so what came out of the Council of Nicaea? So like you had the Nicene Creed. So when the Nicene Creed was put out, the Christian faith was reaffirmed. Now people had the actual literature, the actual creed that is stated now till this day in all of our liturgies about how we view the Trinity, how all 3 are one and 3, 3 and 1, okay, and just establishing, reaffirming that belief, and just preventing that heresy from spreading. So, I'm a Coptic Orthodox with Egyptian roots, as Ivor Kovac knows, and I remember from
why
church,
we call him Great Pharaoh.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a lot of people when they say like, "Oh, what's your faith?" I tell them, "Well, I'm Coptic Orthodox." They're like, "Coptic? Huh? Never heard of that before." And really, Coptic is just the same word as Egypt. It's just the Coptic word for Egypt. It was just Iptic. So essentially, they say, or it was Kiptic, and so it's the same word. So Coptic, Egypt. There you have it. So, I here's the thing. So when you have when you talk about the councils, okay, that were taking place in what is today Istanbul, Turkey, it really is a head scratcher. It really is something that as Christians we really do have to sort of lament a little bit, because all 3 of these councils, or 4 of these councils, was taking place in today is Istanbul, Turkey. So all the places where we established the Christian faith and saved Christianity, right, is now a Muslim country, okay, Turkey, right, from the Ottoman Empire. So I remember when I was young, I never even heard of Turkey before. When I was younger, my friend from church told me, he's Coptic Orthodox. He told me, by the way, I went to Turkey. They have the best food and cuisine, and it's beautiful. This, and that. Well, I got to tell you something. Every time I think of Turkey, I'm always thinking of this great occupation, right, of Constantinople, this fall of Constantinople, just how sad it is that the Roman Empire itself, which claimed to be officially Christian, right, there's this glorious sort of phase. You're talking about one of the most dominant, if not the most dominant empire that the world has ever seen. You're talking about the most persecution of Christians, and the very civilization and military that Christ himself was persecuted and crucified in. So you think, I mean, wow, just a very sad situation, because they ended up all becoming Christian after all that. So the very empire that persecuted Christ and crucified him actually became the most powerful Christian empire, right? So it reminds me of pretty much like, you can draw to my, ancestors, my, in the motherland of Egypt, which is essentially like the Roman Empire in the sense that the country was all Christian. Egypt used to be all Christian. It was, Saint Mark, the writer of the gospel, one of the disciples, he went to Egypt and he spread Christianity all over the entire country. And the same thing, the Arabs took over. They burned all the libraries and books and buildings that harbored all this precious knowledge of the Christian faith, which was the Library of Alexandria. And it had, just imagine all the books, the thousands of books and literatures about our Christian faith. They were really celebrating Christianity back then because it was new, right? It was new to the world. The Messiah had come, and they were able to put all the pieces together between the very word of God from the very beginning, right? The very beginning, the Dead Sea Scrolls, all the prophecies, all the Old Testament. Now they were tying it in to everything that Jesus did, so they were getting the full picture now. So people were very excited, and Alexandria was just a center of education. People would travel to Alexandria. Non-Egyptians, they weren't necessarily Coptic or anything. They're just from all over the world, from Greece, from Greece, from all the other places around the world where it was spreading. You had Christianity was spreading in Syria, in India. You have Christianity was spreading in Greece and Italy as well. So that's what's just really sad about the whole thing. I mean, imagine how many books today we would have run into or heard of that would be sold on Amazon today, had those books not been completely obliterated and wiped off the face of the earth.
Yeah, and supposedly also, that's where the original knowledge of Atlantis was kept. When Plato, Plato, he said the knowledge came from like when Solon went to Egypt, and he was interested in their libraries, and they told him, that you Greeks don't know anything. There's not a real old man among you because you don't have any ancient knowledge. So, I mean, assuming that story is true, but I mean, it could be because the Greeks, they used to love going. I mean, they used to go to Egypt even before Alexander the Great went and conquered Egypt because they liked to go to the libraries there and look for knowledge and stuff. So,
and it was just the center. It was just the center of Alexandria. Like the city of Alexandria itself was a place of knowledge and education. Like it was like university, but like it's the whole city, and it was developing, and they were making the civilization was growing. Like if you think about it, even though in Egypt was invaded by all those countries like Alexander the Great, the Greeks, and whatnot in the beginning, it was actually working towards becoming a great Christian civilization as well. But that's the thing. You have this interception or this reaction, right? So that's what happened, So I don't back then. So when you tell me how good the food was and how beautiful it is, and this is, I look at Turkey a little bit differently now. I really do see it as just something that's it's a shame, and it's certain things that I don't think were necessarily meant to be. It just doesn't seem right. It just always feels like it should have been something great, till this day. But anyway.
Yeah, I also feel a lot of the same sadness when I think about what happened to Constantinople
Yep.
and Egypt. But as far as Constantinople goes, it's
Yeah.
important to recognize, that Western Europeans are also a bit at fault because they did on one of the Crusades, they did go and ransack Constantinople, and of course, the Greeks were able to take it back, but it pretty much softened them up so that their fate was already sealed as far as the Muslim conquest was going. Like they never recovered that. Like we should have been helping them, and instead, well, I mean, not we, but maybe some of my ancestors, probably not yours, but
Yeah.
some of mine were probably
Sure.
involved in that. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, that's the thing is there was the
Yep.
the Byzantines also had to deal with all sorts of threats from Europe as well as Muslims, so they were kind of catching it from both sides. But yeah, it is sad what ultimately happened, like all the
Oh yeah.
ancient architecture and libraries that were lost and the churches that were lost. Very unfortunate.
Yep. Exactly. So, so anyway, we still have at least all the essential thing that made its way throughout the history and kept Christianity thriving, right? And its fruits be plentiful, right? So you have the Nicene Creed, which was produced to reform that the Father, Son, Holy Spirit are all equal. The Church of the Holy Sepulcher was built on another thing that he did, other than setting up the Council of Nicaea, which led to the Nicene Creed, was he ordered the construction of the Church of the Holy Sepulcher, which was basically founded. It was on the site where Jesus' tomb was. So 3 days, he stayed in the tomb for 3 days after the crucifixion, and at that site, he had ordered that they build the church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which today, let me tell you, is the pride of all Christians, especially on the day before the resurrection feast of the Orthodox churches, which we know as Great Saturday. So during this day, every single year, a flame, and now they televise this now. So if you've never heard of this, just Google it on YouTube. Just type in "holy fire," "holy sepulcher," whatever. I'm going to explain it to that. Basically, a flame manifests from the tomb. Like it's like a little fire gets kindled from the tomb, and the fathers on Great Saturday, and the fathers, they help distribute the fire for people's candles, or I don't know, they have like rolls of paper or whatever. And this fire is not like, this is, we're talking about a natural fire just manifesting inside of the tomb, and they distribute the fire. And like I said, they televise it now. So, I've seen it televised on the stations, in Egyptian or Coptic Christian TV stations. You can find it on YouTube. It's not just Coptic, obviously. Like TV in the church in Turkey, in Jerusalem, they all televise this stuff. So you can literally see on television or on YouTube, they're waving their hands through the fire. Like people are just waving their hands, and it simply doesn't burn them. I mean, basically, this fire can be seen as you go back in scripture, like you have the burning bush, which Moses saw, and the bush was not burning, I'm not even sure if you can call it the burning bush. I mean, it wasn't burning, but I don't know, but um, that's the thing. You also have other examples in the Old Testament, like the three youths in the fiery furnace, where they could see a fourth person in there, which we know was representing Christ, and they were not burned from the fiery furnace. Meshach, Shadrach, and I can never pronounce it. Abednego or
I
something.
always say it as Abednego. I'm not sure if I'm
Yeah,
pronouncing it
there you
right
go.
either.
Abednego, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so you have these examples of that. So there's a lot of context here of why you have this fiery flame coming out and not burning people. You also see the example of the apostles, where the Holy Spirit descends on, the Virgin Mary, the disciples, and giving them the tongues to speak of all nations, and the fire does not burn them. It's just And it's seen throughout all Christianity, where basically Christ essentially represents that flame, that love and his passion for people. So that, that's another neat fact for our audience, that, it was Constantine the Great who made sure that church was built. And that site where that tomb was kept, it was protected and made a place of worship for all to relive that glorious day of resurrection. Okay. Constantine the Great, he is revered as a saint in Orthodox churches. I personally remember as a kid watching a saint movie. In our Coptic tradition, they like to make movies to sort of recapture the lives of the saints, right? Because a lot of the stories of the saints were passed on through tradition. And I remember as a kid, they would make these movies, and they weren't like the highest budget movies or whatever, but it was enough to really get the sense and the spirit for this saint and this type of saint, and each saint having their own, just a beautiful example in how they live their lives. So I actually remember watching a saint movie of Father Bishoy, which was one of the early monks of Coptic monasticism, not too long after Saint Anthony and Saint Paul the First ascetic, not Saint Paul the Apostle, Saint Paul the First ascetic. And he's famous in our church, Father Bishoy, because the story goes that he was the one that washed Christ's feet. Christ appeared to him multiple times. He carried Christ on his shoulders, and things like that. Like, he came as an old man, and Christ revealed that he was. So the point I'm trying to make is, in the movie, I remember a beautiful scene where Father Bishoy is in his cell praying, and Constantine the Great appears to him in his cell to honor him and to encourage him, and in his life, in the monastic life, like to continue, and he wanted to give him honor. And I remember seeing, Saint Bishoy, he is also honoring him as well and rejoicing in all the beautiful works that he did for the Christian faith. Like, you were the one that did this, you were the one that did that, and you created this beautiful empire for the faith. And then Saint Constantine is telling him back. He said, "Oh, well, the monks, they receive greater honor, for they soar like the highest. They soar the highest like eagles." And like, I was thinking of the verse in the Bible, like, they will soar like eagles, and they will not grow weary, and this and that. So, there's that scene. So I as a kid, I said, "Oh, well, Constantine the Great, he's also a saint too." Like, you just accept it as a part of faith. But also, there is no question why our Coptic Church reveres him as a saint, because he did in fact suffer for the sake of Christ. He was not a violent man, as someone would put it, or brutal or evil for killing Christians in the past. Everything he did was out of sheer loyalty to his nation and his duties, right? He thought he was doing the right thing. St. Paul thought he was doing the right thing. He persecuted Christians. He was there when St. Stephen was being stoned to death. He was one of the ones who, commanded the stoning of Stephen. He was right there, right? So, Constantine the Great, he meant well as well. Like, he had a troubling past a little bit, but he meant to do well, because once Christ revealed to him the faith, okay, and he had this revelation, he immediately obeyed, because Christ had appeared to him in like a vision, or showed him like a vision of like a Christian symbol. Basically, it was like a cross, like an X going straight through the letter P. And basically that symbol was to signify the name of the one true Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. The P and the X were for the word like P Echaristos, which means to Christ. To Christ, almost like you're saying like to victory, or and the X also symbolizes the cross itself. So through the cross, the Christians will receive salvation. So
I got a question, Great Pharaoh. I'm sorry.
Sure.
So I think like this symbol, it comes from the Greek alphabet, right? It's not from the Latin alphabet.
Correct.
So, and what was Constantine's
It
background?
was called
like,
the Chi Rho. The symbol is known as the Chi Rho. You can type it in, look it up.
Yeah, I've seen it, and they use it on their shields for like 1,000 years after this. But And I'll put pictures in the slideshow. But what I'm wondering is, what was his first language? Was it Greek or was it Latin? It seems like it must have been Greek, right? If he was.
Well, I'm sure they had all their like religious texts. I'm pretty sure were written in Greek because that's where they were getting all those philosophies and all that like astrological like worship and stuff. But I don't know. I mean, I'd imagine he would have been well versed in both Greek and Latin. You know.
Well, yeah, he would have been fluent in Latin. He had to be if he's in the military and in the administration class during that time period. I'm just wondering. I'm thinking, now that I never thought about this before, but I'm just thinking his first language might not have been Latin.
Yeah. I couldn't tell you for sure, but I know that he would go to the court of Diocletian where he was educated and stuff like that. So he had to know his stuff. He had the best education there is. So at the time, so so it was Greek. He did obviously understand like Pia Christos. Yeah, it means like to Christ, and basically it was just a revelation. Christ said like you're gonna go win this next battle. So basically, all the stuff that I mentioned here, folks, like establishing the Holy Church, the Sepulcher, the Milan of Edict, reforming the government. Okay, this revelation that he got, and the battle which I'm mentioning is the battle of the Battle of Milvion Bridge. Okay, this was all before those things that he did. So in other words, when we go all the way back to the beginning, when I mentioned the civil wars, this here's the defining moment, right? So he's like Christ is revealing to him the faith, that he's the one true Lord. He's showing him this sign. There's like another story that goes like an angel also like showed him a revelation or some sort of vision before another battle. So anyway, he puts this symbol, right? Like this X and this P, he puts it on all their shields, right? And they go to war. And they defeat Maxentius in the famous Battle of the Milvian Bridge. And like I said, the sign that was revealed to him was called the Chiro. And Christ told him you would have great victory, essentially. And so Constantine's forces were basically outnumbered 2-1. And yet he was able to drive Maxentius and his forces back, where they mostly were like slain and drowned in the river, including Maxentius himself. So you can draw that also parallel to Joshua back in the in the Old Testament. They were also outnumbered, and against the Canaanites, and the commander of God's army. He says, "I'm the commander of God's army," which most study Bibles will tell you that was probably Archangel Michael who appeared to him and told him you're going to be victorious and you're going to go win the battle. And it's the same idea. He was outnumbered like 2-1 and this and that. So that explains when we go back to how is it that the Roman Empire, which completely they were the ones that basically they crucified Christ, and they were the ones that put a stop basically to his whole ministry and everything, and intimidated. How is it that they became a Christian nation? So it's like Christ himself has basically shown himself to Constantine the Great. And so Constantine the Great, who has this high position now in the military and has great power in the Roman Empire, is now going to make them officially a Christian empire. So you can draw the conclusion that he was responsible for helping to save the Christian influence around the world. Even though Christ prophesied that the Son of Man would not return, the second coming to judge the world until the gospel was preached unto ends of all the earth, there still had to be someone to step up and fulfill that role in terms of military and protection and justice. It was Constantine the Great. He did that. So, he does deserve to be honored, because Christ also said, many are called, but few are chosen. He wasn't only called by God to preserve the faith and let the Christians out of persecution, but he was also chosen because he chose to obey. And, right after, he was just fulfilling his civil duty. Well, he chose to obey instead of fulfilling his just saying, I'm going to fulfill my civil duties, or I'm going to fulfill my own selfish political interests. Right. So, he could have been a corrupt leader and not have done this job. So it definitely was a big task at hand, and he fulfilled it. Like I said, the symbol's called the Chiro, and basically it's like I said, it was like an X and like a P. The P for the word Pie Christos, which means to Christ. X symbolizing the cross, and they did use that on their shields for like the next 1,000 years. Okay, um, so this man was, I think, overall, in conclusion, you can say he was considered a great saint. It was obvious he was called to greatness. I mean, even his mother is deemed a saint in the Orthodox Church, Helena. She's known as Saint Helena. I don't know about Catholic churches. I'm pretty sure they recognize her as a saint, but she was the one who discovered the actual cross which Christ was crucified on, and she brought it back to Rome, where it was distributed all around the world to different churches and monasteries. I actually remember as a kid going to a monastery in California. There's like a third or fourth Coptic monastery in all the U.S., the monastery of St. Anthony being the first one. I do remember they had like a cross on display, like next to the entrance of like the altar on the men's side. I believe, from what I remember, yeah, my mother, she was permitted by the monk to like, just to hold this small cross, and she showed it to me, and she said, there was like some little kind of like a clear glass casing. It was very small, and it was located at the very center of the cross, of this handheld cross. And in that little clear glass covering, my mother said was a small chip of the wood, which was from the very wood from the cross of Christ. So I was honest. I remember just being in shock, and I was like, "Oh my God!" Like Christ Himself, and this little chip. This was the very wood, and when I come to think about it, that little chip, being so small as it was, is telling me that cross was able to make itself all around the entire world over many centuries, and was able to, be spread throughout many monasteries. Churches were able to have that very chip of Christ's cross blessing their monasteries and communities. I mean, such a beautiful sight, really. Just when you think about it, amazing. Things that you would never think of, and how these amazing historical events take place. And certainly there is certainly some as a man of faith, definitely there's certain things we can't explain. He ended up getting sick in his last days, as he was getting older. I believe he was like in his 60s, late 60s, when he started getting sick. He ended up getting baptized, but by what, like I said, most people say it was an Arian bishop named Eusebius. Others say it was Pope Sylvester the First. But either way, he was officially baptized, right? So although the Catholic Church finds it heretical to consider him a saint officially, they can't deny his salvation. I mean, there is, you should, they're not the ones to judge, okay? The baptism, at the end of the day, it's not really who administers to it. This is just my opinion, like, to me, I don't know what the difference would be between a ecumenical bishop who follows the sound doctrine versus one who they say was Arian, but still the church is going through trials. You don't exactly know Eusebius, like, what his faith was exactly. They were still trying to figure things out. But at the end of the day, this man was baptized. He was cleansed of his sins, and he was glorified as a saint. I don't think there's anything else that needs to be said. He was later buried in the Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul, Turkey. So, just to give you some more facts, he basically started the construction of the Church of the Holy Apostles, and he had planned to be buried there. But he actually took relics of other apostles around the world and put them in that church. So that's why he called it the Church of the Holy Apostles. So, at the end of the day, from what they're saying, the church got, when the Ottoman Empire took over, I think like the tomb got looted or something like that. Maybe some things were stolen, or the tomb got damaged or something like that. I don't know, but what I do know is that uh, uh, there was a mosque. There's a mosque that was built over it by the Turks, and they're saying that his body might have been moved by his brother or something like that. But there's really no clear cut explanation. Like his body could very well be, right in the center of this church in the capital of the Ottoman Empire, right? So like the ruler of the Roman Empire is literally just very well could just be laying right under the very capital of Turkey. So it's funny, it's like it's something to think about too. Like even though the Turks took over and they established their great Ottoman Empire, you know, um, they're able to wipe out all the Romans except for the very ruler that established, the very existence of this Christian empire. So, you know, um, you can very well say that this empire is standing on a very foundational ruler of Christianity. So, it's just something ironic. They do say that his relics possibly have been recovered and that they're in a like I don't know what the word is, sepulchus or something like that, some sort of like a vessel.
Sarcophagus.
Sarcophagus. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, it's a tough one. And so I think that some sources say that maybe some of his relics had been recovered. The, in an archaeological museum in Istanbul, Turkey. So yeah, they say that a fragment of it is possibly preserved. Overall, the Church of the Holy Church of the Apostles, at the end of the day, that those who were buried in this church were basically Constantine the First, Constantinus the Second, Julian, Jovian, Valentinian, Theodosius the First, Marcion, Arnian, Anastasius, Justinian. I know you don't know these people, but at the end of the day, they were rulers from the Constantine dynasty. They were popes, and there were some saints, relics of saints. So this church is it's a pretty big deal. It has a lot of very honorable people in the history of our Christian uh, society. In the Christian Empire, the first Christian Empire, you could say, which was the Roman Empire.
What's the name of the church again?
The Church of the Holy Apostles. It's in Istanbul, Turkey. They're saying although the sarcophagus of the emperors were raided by crusaders during the Fourth Crusade in 1204, some of the oldest porphyry sarcophagi have survived. Two in the atrium of the Hagia Irene, four outside the Archaeological Museum, and a fragment of a seventh in the museum's Istanbul through the Aegis Pavilion. This fragment is believed to be from the sarcophagus of Constantine the First. And I have a list of like 14 or like 20 different rulers and popes and bishops that were like, and that's aside from Andrew, Luke, and Timothy. They had the skulls of Saint Andrew, Luke, and Timothy at this church. I mean, this is a really big deal. The Church of the Holy Apostles, it literally definitely deserves to be called that. Definitely lives up to its name. It even believes to be part of the column of flagellation to which Jesus had been bound and flogged. Its treasury also held relics of Saint John Chrysostom and other church fathers, saints, and martyrs. Over the years, the church acquired huge amounts of gold, silver, and gems donated by the faithful. So, yeah, I mean that's that's a lot, that's pretty amazing. So, at the end of the day, I think it's fair to assume that his relics really didn't leave Constantinople. I mean, there's just they built the mosque over it. There had been a lot of damage done to the tomb and this and that. So they were able to recover certain parts of it. But at the end of the day, if you just think about it from a kind of outside the box, it's just ironic how the very ruler of the Roman of the Christian Roman Empire is buried there in the right in the capital of the Ottoman Empire. It's still there, and so I think that's symbolic in a sense that, along with the apostles, that, Christianity is always managed to survive. And regardless, the Ottoman Empire is never going to be as big or as strong as the Roman Empire was. Like, we've already seen, like, Christianity make its way through and the Roman Empire transforming. So, I think the point's been made. And so, that's what we see as a pattern throughout all of history. In AD, right after the death of Christ, right, you see that it makes its way, and just as Christ prophesied, it will reach all the ends of the earth. So, King Constantine, or Emperor Constantine the Great, was a great part of that, and he definitely deserves to be mentioned in our videos and talked about and celebrated. To be quite honest, it's quite remarkable. Journey that he took. So, that's what I have for today, and I certainly will certainly be tying in some things to this period of time. Obviously, with the Byzantine Empire. That's another thing that I mentioned is when you hear Byzantine Empire, that is essentially the Christian Roman Empire. It's the same thing. So. Definitely, I think we're going to run into this continuously, right? It will always be running into, history of the Byzantine Empire, because so much just went on during that time period. So it was very, very interesting, and I'm glad that our audience was here to join us this evening. We'd like to thank our audience for taking the time to listen and spend time with us, and just learning something you just didn't you just never thought of before, and so now when people mention Constantine the Great, it's not just some, oh yeah, I heard of that guy, this and that, but he really did do a lot of significant, powerful things that are still significant today in Christianity.
Yeah,
So,
like a lot of churches still use the Nicene Creed. It's also used like
we use it
it's
in our
not.
church.
Yeah, Catholics use it. I think every Orthodox uses it, and a lot of Protestants also use it. Like the Lutheran Church has it.
Yep.
Um, uh, and a couple other things I wanted to mention earlier, like those countries you visited, Great Pharaoh, in the Balkans. Those like Croatia and
With Macedonia, Serbia, Montenegro, and Croatia.
yeah, those are all the people there. They're all actually successor populations that moved in after when the Byzantine Empire was weak toward the later days. They kind of moved in and took over, but then they adopted Orthodoxy. So they're affiliated with, well, I guess with the exception of Croatia, they're affiliated with the Greek Orthodox Church and of course Constantinople.
Yep. Yep.
And the Byzantine architecture is probably the most lasting thing, I would say, from the Byzantine Empire. If anybody is like, I've seen other people talking about this on YouTube, like who would be the Byzantines today? So the major people groups, the largest people groups that composed the Byzantine Empire was the Greeks, of course, and the Syrians, Aramaic-speaking people, the Egyptians,
Yep.
and I think was there a fourth? No, not.
Well, they're saying Asia too. I mean, there was parts in Asia.
Well, yeah, but most of the people in Anatolia were speaking Greek. Like
Right.
they were Greek and Celtic populations that had assimilated to the Greek culture. And then from Syria on down to Egypt, it was mostly Aramaic. So
Yep.
what's left of the Byzantine Empire is the older Orthodox churches, like the Greek Orthodox, the Coptic Orthodox, and the Syrian Orthodox. Like
Yep.
the religious institutions which were a big part of that shared culture, are still around, and you can still see like the architecture and the robes that they wear and the ceremonial objects. I mean, you know all this, of course, but maybe not everybody that's listening doesn't.
Oh yeah, of course.
So,
I'm glad we can fill them in. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's and also the whole reason that the Russians decided to affiliate with the Eastern Orthodox Church instead of the Catholic Church or Islam was because when they visited Constantinople, like they visited Constantinople, Rome, and then some Muslim place in the Middle East, maybe Baghdad, I'm not sure. But out of the three, Constantinople was the most impressive. So that when these ambassadors came back, they told their rulers that they didn't know whether they were on heaven or on earth, and they were the most impressed by that. So that kind of created the argument for them. So yeah, it's a lot of it's pretty interesting, to think about it. But yeah, that's basically what has survived from the Byzantine Empire is the older Orthodox traditions.
Yep.
Greek, Aramaic, and Coptic. I think Aramaic are the Syrian Orthodox, and they're part of the Oriental Orthodox, right?
Yeah, the Syrian Orthodox, the Armenian Orthodox, the Indian Orthodox, Ethiopian, Eritrean, and Coptic.
Although the Indian Church, they take a lot more. There's not as much Byzantine influence on them because they're much more remote. They take a lot more of their cultural influence from India. They have some cool looking architecture as well. But it's different. It's it's an Indian style, and they make different use of color and stuff. But
cool.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, that's awesome. We're so glad to have our audience here this evening with us, and we will catch you guys next time for another episode of Rediscovery Channel, and we wish you guys a safe and joyful rest of your weekend. Thank you.
Unus renovatus est a Christo regnante. Gaudete, Christus est natus, ex Maria Virgine, gaudete.